There are moments in history that seem to end in silence. A public execution, a broken body, a crowd that slowly disperses, a state sentence carried out exactly as intended. From a distance, that is what this story looks like. One man is arrested. He is beaten, mocked, condemned, and led outside the city to die. A Roman officer stands close enough to see every stage of it. His task is not spiritual, it is procedural. Keep order, complete the execution, confirm the death. And yet, in the tradition that grew around this moment, that officer does not leave the scene unchanged. Some accounts present him simply as the centurion who stood before the cross and declared that Jesus was the Son of God. Later church tradition goes much further. It gives him a name, Longinus. It gives him a history, a conversion, a mission, and eventually a martyr's death. Whether one approaches that story as history, testimony, or faith, the central tension remains the same. How does a man shaped by empire, violence, and discipline become one of the witnesses most remembered in Christian memory? And what was it exactly that he saw? Before we go further, take a moment and ask yourself this. If you were standing there, would you have seen what he saw? To understand that, the story has to begin before the hill, before the spear, before the words that would echo across centuries. It begins in the hours when Jerusalem was already moving toward a verdict. Jesus of Nazareth had been arrested in the night, brought before religious authorities, accused, struck, and condemned. By morning, he was taken to the Roman governor, because under occupation, death on that scale required imperial approval. The charges, the tension, the crowd, the pressure of public order, all of it converged in one place. In the source tradition, Pontius Pilate appears unsettled. He questions Jesus. He sees the accusations. He hears the noise rising around him. Yet Jesus does not answer in the way condemned men usually do. He does not plead. He does not fight for sympathy. He does not attempt to out-argue the charges. That silence in the narrative becomes one of the first signs that this is not unfolding like an ordinary trial. The crowd is given a choice, Jesus or Barabbas. The crowd calls for Barabbas. Pilate asks again, what should be done with Jesus? The answer comes back harder each time. Crucify him. That is the political layer of the story. A governor cornered by pressure, a crowd stirred by rage. A sentence moved forward because power often chooses stability over justice when the cost of resistance feels too high. Then comes the military layer. The soldiers take Jesus away. The punishment begins. In your source, the centurion is already present as an observer shaped by years of force. He has seen men break. He has watched fear turn to begging and pride turn to panic. Violence does not disturb him. It is part of the machinery he serves. But the script keeps returning to one detail. This prisoner does not behave like the others. He is scourged, mocked, dressed in a robe, crowned with thorns, struck again. The soldiers turn suffering into spectacle. But the centurion, in this retelling, does not join their laughter. He watches. And what troubles him is not only the brutality, it is the composure. That is where the first interpretive shift appears. At the factual level inside the story world, the man is beaten by Roman soldiers under legal sentence. At the testimony level, witnesses remember his silence, his endurance, his refusal to answer cruelty with cruelty. At the interpretive level, that composure begins to mean something. It is read not as weakness, but as dignity. Not as collapse, but as purpose. That distinction matters. Because once later tradition begins telling the story of Longinus, the transformation does not happen because he suddenly dislikes violence. It happens because the violence no longer explains the man standing in front of him. The procession to Golgotha deepens that tension. Jesus is made to carry the cross through the city. The streets are full of reactions. Some mock, some watch, some grieve. In the script, Mary and John appear inside that movement of chaos, trying to reach him. Jesus falls. He rises. He falls again. Eventually, Simon is compelled to carry the cross behind him. The death march, continues in full public view. For the centurion, this would still have been routine in one sense. Rome used public death not only to punish, but to communicate. Crucifixion was law turned into theater. It told the population what happened to those who crossed imperial lines. It was supposed to humiliate. It was supposed to erase. It was supposed to leave nothing noble behind. And yet the narrative keeps resisting that intention. Jesus speaks to the women of Jerusalem. He directs attention away from himself and toward them. Even in collapse, his words move outward. The centurion hears this. In the structure of the story, that matters, because every new sentence from Jesus breaks the logic of ordinary execution. A dying man is still thinking about others. A condemned man is still speaking with clarity. A body is failing, but the center of the person seems untouched. Then, the scene reaches the hill. The cross is laid down. The nails are driven. The body is raised. Two others are crucified beside him. One mocks, one pleads. Jesus answers the one who pleads with a promise of paradise. This is not described as a courtroom victory, not a military victory, not even survival. It is something stranger. He is losing everything visible while still speaking like someone who possesses authority. That is one of the reasons this scene has endured. It reverses expectations at every level. The crowd sees weakness. Many readers see sovereignty hidden inside humiliation. The empire sees another body on a cross. Believers see the center of redemption. A soldier sees a condemned man. Tradition says he begins to see far more than that. Then comes the heart of the story. Darkness covers the land. Jesus speaks words of forgiveness. He addresses his mother and the disciple near her. He cries out in anguish. He refuses the comfort offered on a sponge. And finally, according to the gospel language echoed in your source, he says, "It is finished," and commits his spirit into the Father's hands. Then he dies. At this point, the script moves through three layers almost at once. First, the fact layer within the gospel-shaped account. Jesus is crucified, speaks from the cross, and dies under Roman execution. Second, the testimony layer. Those present remember specific words, specific reactions, specific moments that shook them. Third, the interpretation layer. Darkness, the torn veil, the earthquake, the silence of the crowd, all become signs that this was not merely one more execution at the edge of Jerusalem. And it is here that the centurion speaks. Truly, this man was the Son of God. In the source you gave, that declaration becomes the hinge of everything that follows. It is the moment the executioner becomes witness. The officer who came to enforce a sentence becomes the man remembered for recognizing the one being condemned. Now the story could end there and still carry immense force. But the tradition does not stop there. After Jesus dies, the practical duties continue. Passover is near. Bodies cannot remain on the crosses. The condemned men beside Jesus have their legs broken. Jesus appears already dead. Still, the officer must confirm it. In your source, that is when the spear enters the story. The centurion pierces Jesus' side, and blood and water flow out. John's testimony is then invoked as witness language. This moment is especially important to handle carefully, because it sits directly at the boundary between scripture, testimony, and tradition. The piercing itself belongs to the gospel account. The blood and water belong to that account as well. But the idea that the centurion's eyes were healed when the blood touched him, that belongs to later tradition, as your source itself indicates. It is not presented with the same weight as the crucifixion itself. It is something church memory tells, not something all historical approaches would describe in the same way. That distinction should stay clear. So the strongest honest reading is this. The script presents the spear thrust as part of the execution narrative, and later Christian tradition adds to that scene a personal miracle that symbolizes the officer's inner awakening. Whether taken literally by believers or symbolically by others, the meaning is the same. The man who helped confirm death is now portrayed as finally seeing, and that may be the most powerful image in the entire story. Not simply that he looked, but that he saw. What did he see? Perhaps a man who did not curse his killers. Perhaps someone whose suffering did not turn into hatred. Perhaps an innocence that refused to become self-defense. Perhaps a kind of kingship that looked nothing like Rome. And perhaps, for later believers, something even larger. The moment when empire touched the body of Christ and could not understand what stood before it until it was too late. From there, the script moves beyond the cross and into the life tradition attributes to Longinus after the crucifixion. This section must be framed with caution because your source itself signals the shift. It says Scripture does not detail every moment that followed, and that church tradition and ancient writings recount what came next. That is an important boundary line, and it should not be blurred. According to that later tradition, the centurion could not return to ordinary service. He was haunted by what he had witnessed. Rumors spread that the tomb was empty. Reports circulated that Jesus had been seen alive, and the man who once served Rome with unquestioning force could no longer live as if Golgotha had been just another assignment. This is where testimony enters in a deeper sense. The story no longer describes public events alone. It describes inner consequence, a conscience under pressure, memory that will not fade, a soldier divided against his own former life. Some believers have long read this as the natural result of witnessing the crucifixion. Others may see it as the church giving narrative shape to a deeper spiritual truth. That contact with sacrificial innocence can expose the emptiness of power. Either way, the logic is coherent. Once the centurion's perception changes, everything else becomes unstable. His rank, his armor, his loyalty, his identity, his idea of strength. The source says he resigns, leaves the army, joins the followers of Jesus, and becomes a preacher of the gospel in regions associated with Cappadocia and Caesarea. He is no longer introduced as the officer of Rome, but as the witness of the cross. That reversal is the point. The man whose credibility once came from imperial rank now speaks because he was there, not because he heard a theory, because he watched the death himself. That kind of witness has always carried unusual force. A former enemy can become a stronger testimony than a lifelong ally. A person shaped by violence can make mercy visible in a way others cannot. A soldier saying, "I saw him die," carries one kind of authority. A soldier saying, "And in that death, I found life," carries another. Then the story moves toward its final turning point. Rome, in the tradition you provided, does not reward betrayal of empire. Longinus is arrested, threatened, pressured to renounce Christ. He refuses. He is executed, beheaded, and remembered as a martyr. Later communities venerate him as a saint. Stories of miracles gather around his memory and burial place. Again, the levels need to remain distinct. The martyrdom belongs to church tradition, not to the direct biblical crucifixion account. The miracles at his tomb belong even more clearly to devotional tradition. But these details are not random additions. They serve a narrative and theological purpose. They complete the arc. He begins as an agent of state death. He ends, in tradition, by accepting death rather than denying the one he once pierced. That is the symmetry. That is why the story endured. It is not only the story of a centurion who witnessed the crucifixion. It is the story of reversal, of authority turning into surrender, of force turning into faith, of a man trained to enforce truth from above, becoming a man broken open by truth from below at the foot of a cross. And maybe that is why later Christians kept telling it. Because Longinus is not just a character in the margins of the Passion. He is a mirror for a certain kind of human transformation. The kind that does not happen in comfort. The kind that happens when a person's entire framework fails. When duty no longer answers conscience. When power no longer explains reality. When a death that should have closed the case instead opens a question that cannot be silenced. Who was this man? The Gospels answer one way. Church tradition answers with even more color and devotion. History asks what can be verified. Faith asks what must be understood. And this story lives in the tension between those questions. At the level of fact inside the biblical account, a Roman centurion stood at the cross and publicly reacted to the death of Jesus. At the level of later testimony and tradition, that centurion was remembered as Longinus, a man whose encounter with the crucifixion redirected the rest of his life. At the level of interpretation, he became more than an individual. He became the image of someone who came to carry out an execution and left having been judged by what he witnessed. That is why the story still has power, because it suggests that proximity to suffering can harden a person, but it can also awaken them, because it suggests that sometimes the first person to recognize the meaning of a moment is not the insider, not the disciple, not the priest, not the ruler, but the outsider standing there under orders. And because it suggests that truth does not always announce itself with victory. Sometimes it appears in apparent defeat. Sometimes it speaks from a cross. Sometimes the one sent to verify death becomes the one who cannot stop speaking about life. That does not remove the darkness of the scene. It does not soften the brutality. It does not erase the cruelty of Rome, the pressure of the crowd, or the pain borne by those who love Jesus. But it changes what the scene means. What looked like the end becomes, for many believers, the center. What looked like failure becomes, in Christian interpretation, fulfillment. What looked like one more state execution becomes a moment the world could not contain. And somewhere inside that moment stands a soldier, watching, listening, trying to understand what no training had prepared him to face. A man whose whole life had taught him that strength means domination now sees a wounded man forgive. A man trained to obey power sees someone under total power remain inwardly free. A man who knew how bodies died finds himself unable to explain why this death does not feel like defeat. That is the real drama of the story. Stay with this moment, because what happens next is not about the cross anymore. It's about what it does to the one who witnessed it. Not only what happened on the hill, but what happened inside the witness. And maybe that is where the story still reaches people now, because many know what it is to live inside systems they did not design, to speak the language of duty, efficiency, order, survival, to become so used to hardness that softness feels dangerous, to do what is required until one moment forces a different question. What if I have been standing near truth without seeing it? What if the thing I dismissed was the very thing that could undo me and remake me? What if the moment I thought was final was only the beginning? For many viewers, that is where the story of Longinus becomes more than tradition. It becomes recognition. Not everyone will read it the same way. Some will read it as sacred history, some as the expansion of early Christian memory, some as a symbolic narrative built around one line in the gospel. But even across those readings, the emotional center remains strikingly intact. A witness was changed by what he saw, and the change cost him the life he used to know. That is why this is not simply a story about a spear, a title, or a name preserved in church memory. It is a story about confrontation, about the kind of truth that does not argue first, but endures, about the kind of innocence that does not collapse under violence, but exposes it, about the kind of death that, for millions, did not close the story at all. And perhaps that is the final reason the figure of Longinus continues to stand at the edge of Christian imagination, because he represents the person who arrived late, understood slowly, and was still transformed. Not a perfect disciple, not an early follower, not a man with clean hands, a soldier, an anthos, a witness, and in the tradition that followed, a believer. If this story stays with people, it may be because it refuses the easy version of transformation. It does not begin with holiness. It begins with proximity to violence. It begins with a man shaped by the wrong empire. It begins with someone whose first role in the story is not devotion, but execution. And still, the story insists that even there, change was possible. That even there, recognition could begin. That even there, a hardened life could break open. So the image remains. The hill, The darkness, the cry, the spear, the silence after death, and one Roman officer, no longer certain that he understood the world he served. That is where the story turns. And depending on how one reads it, that is where faith, testimony, and interpretation all meet. Not in triumph at first glance, but in a death that refused to remain only a death, and in a witness who, according to the tradition, never escaped what he saw. If this kind of documentary storytelling is your lane, stay with the story a little longer, because the centurion was only one figure standing near that cross, and the lives remembered around that moment open into an even larger world of testimony, memory, and meaning. If this story stayed with you, you're not alone. There are more moments like this, stories that changed history, and the people who witnessed them.